Welcome to the questions and answers segment of Gyro Palooza. This is something I always enjoy. I like to look at everyone's feedback. What are the top requests of the year? In fact, a lot of the requests of previous questions and answers is how we prioritize a lot of our next developments. For example, the prototype Eclipse electron proxy was largely inspired by a lot of the requests of the Eclipse electron. So, your feedback really steers us in the direction of what you're really looking for.
Yeah, and I say this year's questions was fantastic. The variety and magnitude of your thoughts, your input, feedback, questions, this year's got a lot of good variety here, so we're excited to go through them.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and we'll dive in. All right, so we'll get into the frequently asked questions. One of the top questions, update on the beam. We had some updates last year. We made a lot of progress this year. In fact, I think we made some of the most progress this year than any other year. I guess what's taken so long is, this particular development has a lot of technical leap in both the mold design as well as the plastic technology. Completely new plastic technology and a completely new mold design to achieve it. Also worth pointing out, I think we mentioned this in the previous one, but just kind of want to clarify it again. The beam itself, the prototypes that had been out there that you saw at the GYROpalooza Fly Mart, they're kind of one of a kind because the design direction we're going is a completely different direction. But it'll make sense when the product is announced and revealed. We're still not entirely certain when that announcement will take place, but making lots of progress. We're getting closer than ever, and we're really excited about what the direction we're going with that one.
Yeah, with the beam in GYROx, it's been basically our ability to push the limits on disc design, mold design, plastic technology, as well as the processing limits, expanding upon how we process all of these technologies. And so we're taking all these prototypes, all this testing, and we're honing in on a refined version, and we're getting closer than ever. So it's very exciting to roll that out.
Looking at some of the recent progress on some of the newer molds, the Trail, the Bokeh, the time lapse, really some of our best designs, all that knowledge, and a lot of what we learned on those top performing distance drivers is going to be applied on the beam as well. So we expect truly superior performance, and we're really excited for it. Next commonly asked question is when will we see the Bokeh and Aspect? So both of these discs are in the early prototype stages, and we're looking to have Simon do more testing, let him thoroughly test it, and if any changes are needed, we'll let him make those revisions. We want to make sure we try to get it right the first time. Trying to kind of learn from how we release the time lapse, trying to get as much of the feedback and design iterations as possible before the big release. So we're kind of projecting a 2026 release for at least one of them. The second one may be realistically in 2027. So we do plan to get both of them at least in a prototype and limited release throughout next year. Next question is when will we see a release of the boost? So the boost, we're actually making great progress on this one as well. We're in the later stages of this one. Eagle's really liking this version, so I think there's a high likelihood that we could see a stock release next year. Any thoughts or other comments on the boost as far as kind of the progress that we went through on that one?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of maybe a zoomed out approach of designing discs for our elite team. The time lapse, we were very forefront with having multiple versions and kind of having external testing. We're now shifting a little bit to more internal methodical testing with the players, so it's just a little bit of different of approach. And that way it allows us time to internally test and refine things rather than trying to have everything external. So between the Aspect and the boost, things internally are going very well. Working with Eagle and Simon and our elite team on their feedback has been just one honor to develop discs of the caliber that we need for the elite team. It's been a rewarding challenge from a disc design standpoint. It's a lot of fun.
We also had a handful of questions about the turbulence and range, or in other words, the glide reducing profiles that we've got on those. Decent interest on those, and it's kind of an experimental approach to disc design, and overall very happy with the results. That glide reducing profile really does serve a really important utility in approach discs. That more predictable drop kind of gives you more accurate shot placement. I mean, it's kind of really the reason why disc golfers use a putter or a mid-range as their approach disc, it's got more control in its drop than, say, a distance driver. And so, this glide reducing profile really enhances the utility of a putt and approach disc.
Yeah,
so,
and on top of the flight, the secret sauce that I'm really proud of is the ergonomics and the feel of these discs. A lot went into how do they feel in the hand, how are they reacting when you throw them, especially sidearm. I feel like their shining characteristics are very forgiving on a sidearm throw. So this glide reduction profile, this geometry has been a really fun challenge to balance the performance of flight, but also making it ergonomic, so it's very forgiving in a wide range of players' forms. And now that we've done it with the turbulence at range, that's a range of speeds and stabilities, we now can integrate this to gyro molds and a range of stabilities and speeds. So as we go through our lineup, we'll be picking some slots to introduce more.
We also had a lot of questions, kind of along lines of what are our thoughts about a recent video that another company posted that kind of compared the weight distribution of an MVP disc to the other company's discs. And I guess my initial impression is I'm quite skeptical. The video suggests that the flight plate thickness of a gyro disc is greater than 2 millimeters, but our millimeters show that isn't. Our measurements show that's not the case. So I suspect that the fact that they cut the flight plates out by hand, it's not providing a meaningful level of accuracy for weight distribution. So overall, just quite skeptical. But also along those lines, I guess along the thickness of the flight plate is where is that weight being redistributed? If it's coming out of the flight plate and going into the rim, you've got the inner rim and the outer rim. And obviously for the best moment of inertia, you want that weight in the outer rim, and only a gyro design can achieve that distribution to the outer rim, whereas a solo mold is more apt to concentrate that weight towards the inner rim. So even looking at the flight plate thickness aside, you got to look at moment of inertia instead of just the flight plate thickness.
Yeah, in other words, they have the right idea, but you have to look at the full picture of where the mass distribution really lies. Flight plate's a small component of the disc, whereas that rim that's where a lot of our mass shift is in our gyro technology. So we have, this is just a very brief overview. We have a more formal approach on how to break this down from a technical standpoint. That'll be something we can look at in the future.
Yeah, we'll definitely be exploring this, and we'll be reporting on this more in the future. But either way, it's great to see other companies have recognized the benefit of a gyroscopically enhanced disc. The gyroscopics is a very important part of a disc's flight. That predictable side-to-side motion. Getting a more controlled flight on a disc is everything when it comes to disc golf discs. So it's great to see that other companies have recognized the benefit. Electron watt when. In fact, it was worded just like that, just like beam when. This time we're asking electron watt when. And as you know, we released it in the circuit challenge. It's been a hit. I think a very high likelihood that we'll see a stock release next year. Very excited for that one. And also a few requests for the electron tempo. That's another top request. And I think it's also very, very likely that we could see a stock release of that as well. The tempo has been a really popular disc. In fact, one of our most popular releases this year. So definitely a worthy disc for electron. Updates on the Cypher. It's interesting to see that. Back during COVID, we had a lot of molds built and PDGA approved, but of course the pandemic caused us to shift priorities to our existing lineup. And this year we've made a ton of progress with getting a lot of those discs stock released. The Tempo, the Engine, and Trance have been able to make a debut, 2 of those at least being a stock release. And so made a lot of progress in getting that backlog from that many years ago, into our lineup as planned. We're probably going to prioritize the S-Spec and Boca over the Cypher, so more than likely you'll be seeing more releases of those, but we'll get there eventually. Lots of requests for apparel, of course. That's great to see. We've been slowly rolling out some apparel options on MVP Pro Shop, and we expect that rollout to continue. These developments do take time. Vetting quality suppliers takes time, but we expect a more steady rollout. So slow but steady rollout. And these early stages of the apparel rollout, we're expecting to be a lot of them focused on MVP Pro Shop. It's going to be kind of our testing ground to see which apparel options are most popular. The apparel industry can be really hit and miss when it comes to style. So, we don't want to induce a lot of risk on the retailers of releasing a lot of styles that don't do well. So we're going to kind of use MVP Pro Shop as a testing ground. And once we kind of learn what apparel options are most popular in the disc golf market, those will be the ones that will eventually roll out as wholesale options so that you'll be able to buy them at your retailers as well. Are you still working on Eclipse Electron? Absolutely, made lots of progress here. As you guys seen at the GYROpalooza Fly Mart, got the prototype proxy in the Eclipse Electron plastic, turned out great. Any other thoughts on that, Chad? I mean, I think
yeah, no, it's something it's a long time in the making. We've focused so much on our stock Eclipse, and now getting it into Electron it's something we've been working on for a long time now, and we're definitely glad to start rolling it out.
Yeah, and again, your feedback last year, we had so many requests for the Eclipse Electron last year. It was quite insightful to have that feedback. So we appreciate your insight and feedback. We really did prioritize this development this year because of your feedback. So we plan to roll out some experimental releases in the coming months, and if the feedback's great, very high likelihood we could see a stock offering in the future as well. Will GYROpalooza be open to public in the future? So our goal is to accommodate as many people as possible, make the event as big as possible without compromising the experience. That's a very important goal of ours, is to make sure we don't compromise the experience. And if we were to open it up to the public, we worry that we could compromise the experience. It'll be just too crowded. The logistics of that many people gets challenging. Even just infrastructure logistics. We're in a small rural community. Lodging and transportation for very large numbers of people can be a challenge, and it'll just compromise the travel experience as well as the event experience. So I'm guessing for the foreseeable future, it's going to be a sweepstakes opportunity, but we are trying to figure out how to accommodate as many people as possible in a way that doesn't hinder the experience. Next common question is a lot of requests for more fission. I certainly agree. Fission is one of my favorite plastics. Last year, a lot of requests for Eclipse, and again, we prioritized that feedback. We released a lot of stock options in Eclipse, and seeing the interest in fission, I definitely see us releasing some more options in fission as well.
Yeah, and I think particularly not only fission rolling out in other drivers, but as we expand our driver lineup with our new optimized technology with like the Trail, the Boca, and as we expand more models with this optimized geometry, I think fission is going to be prime for combining the two together.
Yep, absolutely. See, why did we choose to bring back the particle from retirement? Just because we thought it was a great disc. It's one of our personal favorites from back in that era, back in 29 when we had to discontinue it, mostly due to low demand, but we felt it was just overshadowed by the Envy and the Proxy. Very similar flight to the Envy, kind of maybe like a Proxy feel. It was a great disc, and just the market has changed so much. We just want to give it another chance, see how the market feels about it. The market loves it. High likelihood it could come out of retirement, but at least just wanted to give it a chance in the new market.
Yeah, if you like the Envy Proxy, give this a try. I'm kind of curious how you feel it fits in between the Envy and Proxy. It's similar stability to the Envy, but a little bit different hand feel that might surprise you.
And then I guess another question is similar question is what goes into the decision about which molds to bring back from the retired status. And again, it's just a lot about how we felt about the previous discs, or just the interest. For example, with the Thrill, Eagle just expressed a lot of interest in it, and it shared the core with the Photon, so it was actually pretty easy, just some minor maintenance to recommission the old mold insert. Same thing with the particle. It shares the essential core with the Envy and Proxy, so just a little bit of maintenance to that old mold to recommission it was quite practical to do, but it may not always be the case with every retired mold from the lineup. Some of them have outdated tooling and just outdated designs. There's just technical limitations to them. All right, we also got a lot of questions just about how we decide the contents of the GYROpalooza boxes in general. So I guess I just kind of go through each of the items one by one, just kind of explain our reasoning for this year's pack. First choice was the particle glow pyro. A lot of this was kind of decided on just because of the high number of requests for the Eclipse pyro. A lot of interest for that. It was probably the most requested Eclipse disc in last year's survey. But there was some technical challenges, technical limitations to be able to make the pyro in regular Eclipse. So we just felt it was a good alternative to at least offer a particle glow option in the pyro. Particle glow is just something new that we're experimenting with. The cool, effect of a glowing proton with the particle is just, a neat glowing effect. Just kind of wanted to kind of offer that experiment in the pyro, but ironically, during that development, we continued to work on making it in regular Eclipse, and we made some progress there. Like some successful early trials of a successful Eclipse pyro. Like we successfully made the Eclipse pyro, at least during the initial trials. We still got to do some feasibility studies just because of the consistency of plastics from our supplier. It's possible that we may get another batch of material and it just doesn't meet that technical window. It's just a tighter window for the Eclipse. Maybe Chad, you can elaborate a little bit about some of the technical challenges.
Yeah, early testing is very promising. Ultimately, it's going to come down to some molds just won't quite adapt well to Eclipse plastic. However, with us giving it a try, because we know the demand is there, our early tests are looking very promising. It's definitely worth trying to make sure we can try and roll it out.
Yeah, and that also extends into the deflector as well. Being able to do the Eclipse pyro, also a possibility we could do the Eclipse deflector. So we're curious if there's interest in either of those. Drop some comments, let us know what you're interested in seeing, and whatever you are interested in, we are going to try to prioritize for you guys. Next disc in the GYROpalooza pack is the particle proton particle. As we mentioned previously, kind of explained our reasoning behind bringing back the particle from retirement. We just felt it was a really good disc and just kind of wanted the new market conditions, getting feedback in the new conditions. So then came the plastic choice, and we just thought it would be funny to just do particle proton particle. Nice little tongue twister there. And again, it's just an experimental plastic technology in an experimental bringing back of the particle. So figured why not. Next disc we got the 10-year anniversary Neutron Wave. The Wave is MVP's most popular mold. The key mold in a lot of people's lineup. We just felt the 10-year anniversary was a milestone worth celebrating. So also with it being the Neutron plastic, we felt that was best for the bottom stamp golden ticket. So that was kind of the reason behind making that one the golden ticket. Plasma Echo, of course, wanted to make sure the Streamline brand got representation in the pack, and particularly Plasma. We talked about it in the main segment. We've made some big improvements to the color. It's just much brighter hue, brighter shades of color. So just wanted to showcase that for everyone. I think you guys will be impressed with the improvements, but we look forward to your feedback. So once you get it, let us know what you think. We're really happy with it, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. And as always with tradition, we always like to feature the lab set-kits and the R2 Neutron in the pack as well. That's kind of part of our sustainability mission. We always like to make sure that we're not having to send waste materials into the landfill. R2 Neutron is our way to get that residual material to reprocess it. It is a technical limitation that you can only get that in black, but lab set-kits is kind of the way of preserving the color of, we don't have to grind it and have to reuse it as R2 Neutron. So if it's a minor cosmetic issue, we keep it as a lab set-kit. If it was a substantial quality issue, or it's just residual material from the process, so that's kind of why you get a combination of those. But kind of including those, because we accumulate those throughout the year, it's just part of our sustainability mission of a zero waste production facility. Next question is, will there ever be an extra firm electron plastic? Unfortunately, no. Electron firm is already the firmest it can be to meet PDGA guidelines for flexibility rating. Ironically, we have experimented with an extra firm at the request of our players, but they're only experiments. There will not be any stock releases unless the PDGA changes its standards on the flexibility rating. If there's anything out there that's more firm than electron firm, it's probably not compliant with the PDGA flex standards. But I personally would like to open up a public recommendation to the PDGA just to reevaluate this, just because it's a very common trend in the market. Some pros really like the firm putters. They just feel like they got better control with their release. And understandably, the flexibility rating is tied around safety and the disc flexibility. But when you look at the nose bluntness between like a putter versus a sharp-nosed driver, understandably a sharp-nosed driver, the flex test is very important for safety. But the putter, maybe they can reevaluate their standards based on nose bluntness, maybe kind of direct proportionality of the nose bluntness to the flexibility standard, just kind of like how the weight is directly proportional to max weight. Just an idea anyways, just my public recommendation to the PDGA, just because that's just a common theme in disc golf with pros. So
in regards to flexibility of, maybe say in this case firm electron or any flexibility, whether it's soft, medium, or firm, I'm kind of excited about, because internally we've invested in some equipment to mathematically define the exact flexibility. The current standard is, you're flexing it on a food scale, and that works, but we really wanted to have a more concise way to measure disc flexibility, because when we're producing our discs and making new blends and changing weights or whatever it might be, we really wanted to have equipment specialized in defining the flexibility of the disc. And maybe we can show some video of our equipment in use.
yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're very proud that we now have a very concise way to measure flexibility, and that's just one of our steps to improving the quality and consistency of our discs. Prior to this equipment, it was a lot of hand feel, a lot of guesswork, and we really didn't like that, because if you had one flexibility that you liked and run to run, maybe it was a little bit different. That could, affect you downstream with performance. So we're just excited to invest in the equipment to make our products even better.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of another reason, especially for electron firm, we're right on the edge of what's the maximum limit for flexibility, and so having this precise jig can give us the confidence to make it as firm as possible without going over. So just having the more precise control to measure is a way to ensure our electron firm is the firmest that is legally allowed by the PDGA standards.
Yeah, even further, we had a lot of requests for extra firm putters, and we were given samples from the market, and it ironically did show that there were a lot that were over the PDGA limit, which is a whole other can of worms that maybe needs to be evaluated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Surprisingly, a lot of requests about more macro discs. I'm really happy to see that. I personally love the macro discs. I got to prioritize.
I got some good news on this front. I've got several drafts pretty much in final form, where once I refine those, we're going to start the mold building process. So I won't spoil it on what models we're targeting, but more macro is going to be a thing very soon.
Macro glitch, please. I've been asking Chad for a few years to run a macro glitch, but I guess why is it taking a little bit longer? We just had to prioritize our time, mainly focus on our regular discs. But as Chad said, he's got some progress. I've seen the macro glitch draft, and so I'm going to keep asking for it until it happens.
Actually, I would like some feedback. When it comes to macro mid-ranges, I'm curious what people want to see most. Is it the reactor, detour, hex? I'm kind of curious, if you were to choose a macro mid-range, what one would you like? That's the one I'm most conflicted on, so give me your feedback there.
A few questions about, will Pearly Proton be an option in the future? And we definitely plan to continue experimenting with it. In a similar manner that we have swirly and non-swirly colors in our Neutron, we'll probably have pearly and non-pearly variety inside the Proton. just to serve as many preferences as possible. You know, I personally like the high transparent candy plastic, but also the pearly Proton looks great as well. So I think both of them are unique enough to worth keeping. So I would expect to see a variety of both throughout the future runs. And again, like, you know, Chad engineered some amazing equipment that can automate that process in as wide of a variety as possible in all of the color, you know, in all of the run. So
yeah, I'm sure many of you have seen the color feeders that were featured in the Smarter Everyday video. You know, at the end of the day, having concise precision equipments open up doors of really tuning in really unique new colors. It's very exciting.
And actually a few inquiries about whether or not there's any new glow colors coming in the future. And you may have seen that we have experimented with an orange glow and a red glow. But they did use a different glowing technology than what we use in our Eclipse plastic. Unfortunately, not quite bright enough for our Eclipse standards. You know, maybe like 5 to 10 minutes glowing time. Not quite bright enough for the standard. So as it stands, the 5 colors that we got in our glow are the only ones that kind of meet our standards for Eclipse, you know, as far as the brightness and long lasting goes. So we are experimenting and trying new things. If we do find a technology out there for other colors, we absolutely will add it to the glow lineup. So yeah, that kind of concludes a lot of the frequently asked questions. We'll kind of go through some various questions of highlight. And again, we want to try to answer as many of your questions as possible. You know, there are, you know, many hundreds of questions. In fact, probably nearly 1,000 questions. You know, overwhelming amount of questions. So no guarantee we'll be able to hit all of them. But so far, the frequently asked questions here does answer a substantial portion of those. So we'll go ahead and continue on through. Our one question we want to highlight here. Does the color affect the flight of a disc? For example, purple discs tend to mold up a little bit more dome than other. So, you know, technically there is an indirect correlation. You know, certain colors have certain processing conditions or properties that does affect the way a disc cools or shrinks. So, I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more about kind of.
Yeah, for colors, at the end of the day, to answer your question, do colors affect the flight of a disc? And they certainly do. But thankfully, you know, we're aware of that, and we do a pretty darn good job of combating that difference between colors with our processing. But furthermore, we have a lot of conversations with our material suppliers on ways to maybe alter the formula for colors to reduce that effect. So it's a combination of us with our skill and processing to, you know, overcome those challenges, but we're also just trying to refine the formulas of the colors to minimize that effect. So at the end of the day, yes, they do affect the flight, but we're also doing our best to make it not the case.
Yeah, in fact, especially in recent months, certain product releases like the time lapse and the trail that have very tight tolerances for the dimensions to hit that stability sweet spot. Those particular developments have really forced us to prioritize actually redeveloping some of our colorants that are used in our production just to try to find some more formulas that are more consistent. So it's very challenging. You know, each pigment kind of affects the way the plastic flows, and it really does make a difference in the way the disc cools up. It's really challenging, but we're working nonstop to try to address these challenges. Can we expect more out of production molds to come back? And I guess we kind of touched on this a little bit in the previous question, but it's certainly possible that more can come back, but probably not the majority of them. Only certain models kind of fit the criteria of sharing a core with existing products. For example, the particle shares a core with the NVN proxy, so like that one, just, you know, a little more practical to bring back by just doing a little bit of maintenance and upkeep on the old mold inserts. Same thing with the thrill, shares the core with the Photon. That one's a little more practical to bring back at the request of Eagle. But a lot of the other ones, though, are very unlikely to see it come back, especially the older mid-ranges too. So
it is really fun to bring back, you know, some molds like we have here and there, but generally most of the time it's just not going to be worthwhile, because I think the mid-ranges are a good example. A lot of the older mid-ranges, they really weren't forgiving when it comes to, you know, different players, you know, forms and power levels. And our new mid-range lineup are just miles better in terms of performance. So at the end of the day, generally speaking, old models are going to be old for a reason, and our new design discs are just going to far exceed their, you know, ability to perform on the course. But there are a few here and there that is fun to bring back and refurbish them and bring them some new life.
Yeah, no, very well put. You know, like the upgrade going from those older mid-ranges to the hex and how good of a disc that is, you know, I think it really goes to show how much, you know, Chad has learned with disc design. So kind of applying that knowledge, you know, as you've seen with the Trail, you know, some of our more recent mold development, Trail and Boca, for example, are some of our best driver designs, and we expect that as we, you know, continue to build out our lineup, we're going to see some more refinements in the discus driver lineup based on what we learned on the Trail and Boca as far as how to optimize that geometry. So a lot of molds, you know, I guess are out of production for a reason, because they are outdated designs and we've learned from them. So just depends on the circumstances of case by case. Could we see a glow-in-the-dark basket? So interestingly, we have experimented with it. We have made a prototype. But unfortunately the cost would be enormous. You know, the basket is just a lot of surface area. The amount of glow pigment powder coat is just, it's a very, very expensive development, and I don't think that the market viability is there for how expensive it would be. Plus I think that just a basket light or integrating other night accessories is just a much more practical way to make a basket functional for nighttime use. You know, with the lunar module, which works great, and very well could explore other accessories as well for night accessories and disc golf baskets. So that's at least for now. You know, not to say we couldn't explore it in the future. What's the one thing you're most excited for in 2026? So actually there is something that we've been working on most of this year that we are very excited about. And it's unrelated to any sponsorship or any specific disc that we have in development. It's something that probably no one is expecting, and that's what makes it so exciting. I guess that's about where we'll leave it for now.
There's so many things we want to say about that, but we're just going to have to let that roll out and speak for itself.
You guys are going to have to wait till 2026 to see what that is.
It's hard to contain our excitement for this one.
Yeah. Do you have any funny stories behind the stamps on the discs in this year's box? I am glad you asked that. That particle Proton Pyro, that UFO stamp, was actually based on a story from a close family friend of a sighting that took place in Marlette. You know, one of Chad's best friend from elementary school, his family saw a UAP in Marlette. And again, you know, it's coming from us, it's secondhand information, but you know, this close friend of ours is probably one of the most level-headed people I know. So I believe he saw something. I don't know where just that he saw, but yeah, that's a fun little social experiment I would like to do is, if you have ever seen anything like that, drop your story in the comments. You know, we're curious what you may have seen. What is the process for deciding which type of disc you want to produce next? I guess I'll let Chad, since you can.
Oh boy, it's a combination of feedback from you guys. I mean, you let us know what you're always looking for, so that's been, you know, very helpful on especially where to prioritize, you know, your feedback. But there's a combination of other factors. You know, our pros, you know, they're on tour and they need the best disc to perform, and we're always trying to find ways to give them better tools to compete at the highest level. So that's always, you know, valid, significant feedback for us to design discs to fit their needs. But then also it's just about pushing the limits on technology, you know, between our glide reduction profiles like the range and turbulence, and really optimize unique geometries is always a fun challenge. Material properties, you know, such as, you know, pushing the limits on fission, Gyro X, and, you know, just new technologies in general. So it's a combination of what is it that we need to fit everyone's feedback, as well as pushing the limits on new technologies. So there's many ways to dice that up, but at the end of the day, we're always working on a lot of fun, exciting new discs and technologies. It's a great honor to be able to make the best disc in the world.
Very well put. Had some questions or some requests for an Eclipse Trail, whether or not we could see it in Eclipse Trail. So I think we talked about earlier about the Eclipse Pyro. There have been some technical challenges to being able to make an Eclipse Pyro, and unfortunately that same limitation is in the trail, the trail mold. It's just that particular geometry. There's some challenges with being able to make it in the Eclipse. So I wouldn't expect one anytime soon. I wouldn't say that doesn't mean we'll never have it, because the Eclipse Pyro, for example, the development of the particle Proton Pyro, we kind of learned that we could actually do the Eclipse Pyro. So, that was kind of served as a stepping stone to be able to make regular Eclipse Pyro. So, we're always learning as we go, and so maybe in the future we could make it happen, but I would expect that one to probably not be an immediate future offering, unfortunately.
Yeah.
As much as I would, love to make it happen.
Yeah, specifically, it's very borderline whether it's feasible or not in the trail. It's leaning towards not feasible, but again, we're not ruling it out. We're going to try really hard to make it happen. I will say in the works, there's going to be potential complements to the trail that are maybe slightly more stable and slightly less stable than the trail that would potentially be capable. So we'll see what we can do. There's a lot of interest in the trail, and we want to work on models around that sweet spot of flight, and keeping them Eclipse compatible is definitely high on the radar. So it's definitely noted because we understand how valuable that would be.
It's a very delicate balance, and the overall geometry, and making sure that it's capable of running it in the glow. So, I hope you can pull it off.
Yep.
Are there new innovations being pursued in Streamline? So overall, I think, this year, a lot of experimentation with the glide reducing profiles. It's kind of a heavily geometric aerodynamic feature, which kind of falls along the ideology behind Streamline. Anything else that you wanted to mention, Chad, on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'd say innovations, but I just would like to highlight, what is Streamline and why do we do Streamline? And it kind of just goes into the fact that making a solo mold disc with our capabilities to make overmolds, Streamline is the highest quality solo mold on the market for the best price possible. Because our ability to manufacture overmold discs takes a lot of resources, because you have to mold things twice. You have double the molds, double the handling, double the inspection. So it's like you're kind of doing everything twice, and we're still very reasonably priced. I just want to highlight Streamline being a very viable option that's economical and high performing. So at the end of the day, Streamline's just an awesome brand, and with us experimenting with some of the glide reduction profiles in the lineup, and we're working with some models for Eagle. He's really loving Streamline. I just want to get a little spotlight on Streamline and what its goals are, and it's a great lineup of high quality discs.
How do we know if our local pro shop will receive the brick and mortar GYROpalooza boxes? So our recommendation is talk with your store directly. Let them know that you're interested in them. Essentially, every brick and mortar retailer is eligible for the brick and mortar product. So express your interest. As long as they know there's an interest, that'll certainly increase the likelihood that they will carry that product. Has there ever been a disc you guys developed that became more popular than you thought it would be, and vice versa? I would say the Watt was incredibly popular, very similar to the Ohm. The Ohm was kind of a great disc, but not quite as popular. There was no Envy, no Hex, but it was a great disc. But the Watt was just unbelievably popular. We kind of think it had a lot to do with the glitch, I think, Chad. Is that because the glitch was insanely popular and everyone kind of wanted a heavier glitch? It kind of fits that role, doesn't it?
Yeah, make it a very, very straight putter with a variety of forms and power levels was kind of the design goal of that. And it was hard to say if the market was going to be receptive to that, but it definitely, people realized that very quickly.
Maybe vice versa. I would probably say the Electron Entropy. That was one of the most highly requested models in Electron plastic a couple of years ago, and the release of it didn't feel like it was that significant, unfortunately. But I guess it is what it is. Not every one of them is a huge success, but a great disc. Just that was, I would say, probably the biggest example of something that wasn't quite as popular as expected. Next question is, what will be the next big thing in disc technology? I personally think GYROX is going to be the next big thing for us. In particular, the fact that it's such a extraordinary amount of tooling design as well as plastic design. The two things together really is probably the biggest technological advancement that we've done in recent years. I think that's going to be the next big thing in our distance driver lineup. Are there any molds coming up on expiry? Are there so many new molds have been added? Which ones are on tap to be taken away in the near future? So at least in the immediate future, we don't have any plans to discontinue anything, but I foresee it as being a possibility as we start to build a more modern lineup of distance drivers. For example, the Trail is being as amazing as it is. Chad's going to be applying that design knowledge to a lot of our future distance drivers, and there probably could be some overlap in our existing distance drivers. Again, got some great distance drivers, but I think that as we roll out some of these more optimized versions based on what we've learned on the Trail, Boca, time lapse, I think that there could be potential overlap. But I don't expect anything immediately in the future. But I don't know, Chad, is that aligned with your thoughts? Is there any other areas in the lineup that you think could potentially?
Yeah, it doesn't really answer the question directly of like, are there any on the chopping block right now? I wouldn't say so, but over time, given our ability to improve our manufacturing capabilities, my disc design and optimizations there, new material technologies, there's always going to be a higher bar. So as time goes on, maybe molds will become dated over time. But as for any that are, getting ready to be cut out, not right now, but over time, things are gonna only get better from here.
What's the reason that the new run discs are coming off a little more dome? Is that what we wanted? And of course they asked, don't make putters and mids domey. We fully agree. We try to keep our putters and mids flat. But yeah, in recent years, a lot of feedback we've had is a little more dome in the drivers to help with that glide. There's definitely a big give and take here. Being able to induce dome into a disc is introducing more outside of the mold shrink and cooling. So when a disc is going through a dome like that, it is vulnerable to inconsistencies. And so, when we've transitioned our production to be in-house, we highly prioritize consistency a lot more inside the mold cooling. Our molds were generally becoming very flat. We are, based on feedback, have been in recent years working to add that, but carefully, doing so as minimally as necessary without inducing a lot of inconsistency. Does that sound right, Chad?
Yeah, that's definitely right, and I would say that really applies to a lot of our old driver designs. But what's exciting about our new driver designs, the Trail, Boca, and other ones I have in the works right now, that is opening up the door to have controlled dome in the drivers. So we are able to, have dome in the design, but also make it even more consistent. So your points were more focused on like our older distance drivers and fairway drivers, whereas now we're able to get more dome and more consistency, which is again emphasis on why we're so excited about our new distance driver design and fairway driver design.
Yeah. Another one is, I don't have a store near me that carries disc golf. How can I get access to the brick and mortar exclusives? And that's a good question. Our recommendation is talk to your local stores. Even non-disc golf stores. If you're in a disc golf area, it's very possible that a convenience store or a hardware grocery store could carry disc golf products. And I'm sure you're not alone in the interest. And the whole goal of our brick and mortar program is to create these conditions for success. Because after all, a physical presence of disc golf and as many stores as possible is so very important for the growth of disc golf. That ongoing exposure to a wider audience, very important. So maybe in the short term, we'll maybe some challenges with finding those products, but there is a reason behind the program, and the goal of the program is to create that recipe for success for brick and mortar retailers to carry disc golf products. So again, if you and your friends in the area don't have a store near you, talk to your local convenience store, grocery store, whatever store is possible for carrying disc golf, but express your interests. If they see that community interest, it could very well help to growing disc golf, which is one of the big goals of our brick and mortar program. And in fact, during the GYROpalooza in-person experience, a lot of feedback from the retailers. They just absolutely love the brick and mortar program. It really helps keep the local community, keep the disc golfers shopping local. That's so important to keep the disc golf community together and thriving for the long term. What are some struggles staying consistent in the disc golf market as MVP is currently on top? Well, I guess when you say staying consistent, does it mean staying consistent with the consistency of run to run in the flight of our discs, or just consistent in the quality of what we do? I guess both of those would be a good question. Whatever the intent was. I guess as far as consistency of discs, Jed, you want to elaborate about the video, the Smarter Everyday 2?
Yeah, the Smarter Everyday 2 video, a key thing or a key takeaway in regards to consistency of the discs themselves would be our melt flow index. In our quality lab tour, one of those instruments was measuring the melt flow index of the material. And there's been a big breakthrough on how we, bring material into our facility and process it. And we've learned that physical characteristic of melt flow index varies lot to lot with our material suppliers. So we've been in close communications with them on honing in a specific tight range of this melt flow. And this is something that we didn't understand prior to this knowledge, and that was a lot of the trouble on our side of processing material where inconsistency was introduced. So having improved our ability to measure this, as well as keeping tight communication with the material suppliers, it's been transformative of our ability to further make our disc more consistent. So that's been a big breakthrough in terms of consistency of discs. Now in terms of market share, consistency is, MVP's at the top. I mean, geez, I think a lot of
hard work.
A lot of hard work.
Dedicated staff.
It goes to many things. Our team has been phenomenal, bringing on our star team, our staff. We're hiring in all departments nearly all the time, which we've got a great team just internally. Our outreach of our dealers. I mean, you can kind of define this many different aspects of our business, but they're all important.
It helps that we love disc golf. We love the products. A lot of the staff here love disc golf, so that helps. We all have the shared mission about trying to be the leading edge in everything we do. It's really kind of our mission statement, really. So I think that's kind of the recipe for this, being consistent as far as consistently on top. So I guess, regardless of the intent of the question, we answered it both ways.
I'd also say your feedback. At the end of the day, we can't be on top of the market if we're not taking your feedback and trying to deliver on that. So your feedback in general, listening to these videos has been, huge for us. So again, thank you for taking the time of watching these videos and giving us this feedback. It's imperative for us.
Is there a such thing as too much glow? Actually, we have had some feedback that our Eclipse is actually too bright. So maybe, so I guess, maybe that could be considered too bright. But maybe for those who want something a little less bright, Total Eclipse has our other glow colors, like our blue glow, our aqua glow, the white glow, and the purple glow. Those are like a little bit less intense in the brightness, but they're still very long lasting. So, if you have found that our Eclipse is too bright, there is a Total Eclipse option as well. So
another way that I've kind of experimented with this, because I remember hearing feedback of it being too bright and it kind of ruins your night vision. Another technique you can use is when you have your flashlight in your disc, you can hold your flashlight a little bit farther away from your disc, and that will lower the brightness a little bit. So that's something to experiment with as well if you want to kind of control how bright each disc is. Yeah, so tell us about what learnings you've done on distance drivers when it comes to gyro. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, the trail, we're going to keep saying that the trail is like our first driver where we've implemented some unique design features in drivers in particular, and it worked great. And we've rolled that out into the Boca. We've even applied that a little bit to the Time-Lapse V3. Just a way we make drivers better, especially gyro versions. So yeah, it's always an iterative process that we're improving upon.
What's an MVP disc that you think doesn't get enough attention?
Yeah, this one, I would definitely say the Reactor. We have a great mid-range lineup, and the Hex is always our first, mid-range that you always hear people say. But I think the the reactor is something that's, very overshadowed by the hex. The reactor is being just one notch up in stability of the hex. So, if you have a mid-range need on, say, a windy day, or if you need a little bit reliability and a little bit more fade, the reactor, I think, is a very underserved mid-range that you definitely should try out.
Yeah, maybe we've been a little guilty with making so many options of the hex, but the hex is insanely popular, so we do cater to that popularity. But I don't know, I think the reactor, maybe once in a while we could do something more with the reactor. I think it's a great disc. Do you have any plans to expand into Europe? So actually we have made some great progress on that in the last year and a half. We implemented a distributor program and have onboarded a number of distributors throughout Europe, and our international sales have grown significantly this year, much to the success of the program. So having these distributors makes our product much more accessible to retailers in Europe. So if you find that like your local retailer does not have MVP discs, make sure they're aware that we have a distributor program now. They can go to the website, find a list of distributors throughout Europe, and they can get our product much more significantly. They no longer have to order across the pond to get our product. And we've got an omni-channel distributor program, so we've got distributors in a lot of different regions throughout Europe. So it kind of caters to all of the, as much of the region as possible. Are there any plans for a more portable or collapsible basket to travel with? So Black Hole Light, the transit bag, is already a very portable option. The Hive baskets are maybe a little bit lighter than that. So we got some pretty light options. At this time, we don't plan to go any lighter just because of it would kind of compromise the performance of the basket. You start taking away chain, because ultimately that's where a lot of the weight is. If you want to get lighter, you gotta start taking away chain. So, but drop us some feedback in the comments if you want to see something lighter than the Black Hole Light or the Hive baskets. Let us know, and we could see if we can go a little bit lighter than those even, and we'll try to balance lightweight with performance to see if we can find a new minimum there. Can we find some aspects and bokehs as lab seconds? So it's certainly possible. But I would say they're probably going to be more rare just because we got such a large variety of lab seconds, because we accumulate lab seconds throughout the full year of our production. And we've only recently been making some lab seconds in the aspects and bokeh. So I would expect that probably more rare. I would expect a very large variety of everything in our lineup that we've been producing this year in the lab seconds. And I guess just kind of elaborating on the lab seconds, when we mix them into the GYROpalooza boxes, it is randomly assorted, but there's also a little bit of a methodology to it. We tend to separate discs by certain classes. We separate out the putters, the mids, even drivers by speed classes. So when they are pulled randomly for the GYROpalooza boxes, that helps ensure to minimize as much overlap as possible. Now, it is possible you may get a putter R2 neutron and a putter in L2. But at the same time, though, we do separate by disc type, so it helps ensure as much variety as possible, meanwhile being as random as possible. Are there any updates coming to the MVP line of baskets? And as we talked about in the virtual segment, we added some accessory products. We added the sound barrier to kind of make your basket a little quieter, maybe kind of make your basket more usable at night with less neighbors. Also, we added the precision conversion strand to make a nice seamless update to your Black Hole Pro to make it like a precision battery, as well as the singularity being another add-on to course basket. So we're still making updates to the baskets, although we've got a very comprehensive line of baskets that have an extensive history of development. I think that we're the market leader in home baskets for a reason, just because we got such a comprehensive lineup of baskets. We fit every need already. But if there's any areas that you feel are lacking, certainly let us know, and we'll take a look and see what we can do. Next question: when will Thad Richardson, your third often forgotten brother, be allowed to take a bigger role within the company? Well, the GYROpalooza, he made an appearance, right, Chad?
Yeah, Thad wears a lot of hats around here. You may not see him all the time, but Thad's working hard.
Yeah, he was at GYROpalooza, so if you were there, you'll probably remember him. have sales at MVP been growing steadily? And they still are. We're still seeing some healthy growth. I would say the growth is not as much as it would have been during like the COVID era or like the economic stimulus back in 2021. So the growth has been maybe more normalized now, kind of back to the pre-COVID growth levels. But disc golf has still grown substantially since pre-COVID. So I'm still very optimistic about COVID, I think, but I do think maybe there's like a little bit of a correction taking place. But as far as the growth becoming more normalized, but I'm optimistic. And in fact, I think the next question was very similar. With all the talk of the COVID bubble having a bust, at least in the investment interest and returning to pre-COVID levels, what data trends are you seeing to be optimistic in this sport? And I guess the area where I'm really optimistic about the future of disc golf is the international growth. It's just exploding internationally, and it's by far our fastest growing area, especially in the EU, but even just all international levels of disc golf. So that's very promising. And in particular, what I'm looking at is why are those areas so successful with the growth of disc golf? And look at countries like Finland, where almost every school in Finland has disc golf. And so I think that's something that other markets want to take a look at, take note of, is the impact that can have for the long-term growth of disc golf. So we've already been doing a lot for schools here in the United States, and we do plan to be doing more for schools. I think that's going to be key for the growth of disc golf.
What is one of the toughest challenges when designing or creating a new mold in each lineup? I would say just the entire process is, we set the bar very high on every step of the process when it comes to making a new mold. So I would say it's almost like we're shooting ourselves in the foot because of those challenges. Mostly because, we really care about the end result. And at the end of the day, everything from designing the mold, manufacturing the mold to the highest tolerances that we need, for example, not having any flash on the bottom edge is very demanding. So we put a lot of emphasis there. As well as the materials that go into it. As we talked about with the tightening of the MFI of the material is very important for us to make sure they're as consistent as possible. We touched on the firmness, the flexibility. We've invested in equipment to make sure we're honing in on the correct firmnesses of every run to run. So I think it's just the fact that we really care about quality and we invest heavily in equipment achieving that bar. So it's I wouldn't say it's challenging in a negative sense. It's challenging in a positive sense that we care about quality extremely. So we heavily invest in equipment to continuously make our products better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Manufacturing disc golf disc is a very, very challenging process from start to finish. Like everything you highlighted, there's certainly no easy step along the way, it feels like. But even along those lines, like the dimensional requirements for a disc require unbelievably high tolerances. And we've learned that especially in recent years, how such the smallest geometric variance can create such a significant impact to the flight. For example, the time lapse, for what we could measure by the naked eye or even with optics, and it still wasn't a level of measurement precision required for consistency. We had to buy a laser microscope that has nano level tolerances. So the tolerances, I think, on top of all of the challenging process, is another layer of difficulty that it's definitely something that we're still trying to overcome, but I think we've made tremendous progress in it. Your support for local charities has been great. What are some of your favorite programs or causes you've supported this year? I would have to say by far the St. Jude project. We have the shift that we've been using as our fundraiser disc in the last couple of years. Last year we had the Proton shift, this year we had the plasma shift, and we've been able to fundraise a lot of money for St. Jude, which we're very proud of. This year we fundraised $40,000 for St. Jude. We rounded up the figure to 40,000. It was just shy of 40,000. And last year was just shy of 50,000. We rounded up to 50,000. So in the last 2 years, we've been able to raise $90,000 for St. Jude. So that's something we're really proud of. It feels good to really make such a big impact, especially for a charity like St. Jude. MVP has really grown its fan community in the past few years. What does GYROpalooza mean to you personally, and how do you see it evolve as an event as the event continues to grow? I mean, overall, just interacting with the fans, hearing the feedback, interacting with customers, Team MVP. I mean, just everything as a whole. It's such a fun experience. I personally like it because it just kind of resonates with all the hard work that we put into MVP. We kind of get to hear, the reception of the fans, of feeling that sense of appreciation and collecting the feedback so that we can carry things forward with great further improvements in our products. How do we see it evolving as the event continues to grow? We certainly would like to kind of add more to the experience. This year we just did the Saturday event. In previous years we kind of had a round of disc golf with GYROpalooza. We'd like to try to make a comeback, maybe add another day for that. Just this year we just kind of kept things a little bit more manageable with just the single day event, but hopefully be able to expand it with other days, whether it's a disc golf event or doing something with Team MVP while they're in town. Is something that we did in the past as well. So just I want to add more to the event in that way, at least in the near future and in upcoming years.
I mean, personally, I really just appreciate the opportunity to see our fans face to face, rub elbows with you, talk disc design, talk manufacturing. Just being able to hear your feedback face to face has been just immensely, humbling and really important for all of us. At the end of the day, we work so hard behind closed doors in our factory, and it's, easy to lose sight of how many fans we have supporting us. And it really means a lot to just get in touch with you all, listen to you, talk with you. It's just a whole new experience that we really appreciate. And so again, thank you so much for that.
Have you ever considered completely reworking the flight number system? And the question goes on to kind of give some specific examples of certain discs that maybe have changed in recent years. And I definitely agree. When we transitioned to production in-house and we kind of changed the approach to the way we cool, the inside the mold cooling, causing a flatter disc, and then we've kind of been adjusting to add a little more dome back into them. So there's been a little bit of an evolution in how we process our discs for sake of trying to become more consistent, but also kind of targeting some of those preferences. And admittedly, we are a little bit behind in getting those numbers updated. I think that we're definitely overdue. We got a lot of irons in the fire, but I think that we are due for an update. So there probably will be soon. What was the driving factor behind deciding to split MVP into 3 different brands, just for different plastic, for example? I think it was mostly just kind of circumstantial at the time of each particular brand. In the case of Axiom, we had interest and wanted to expand into different color overmolds. Early in MVP's history, it wasn't in the technical capability to do such a large variety of colors in that overmold. But as we got a few years into it, we kind of developed that capability to do so, and so we felt that was worth doing. However, like a few years into MVP's history, it didn't feel right to change the feel that we had. The MVP brand had a really consistent look to it. We just didn't want to alter that, and so that was kind of the reasoning behind Axiom. Is there anything else, Chad, that you kind of want to elaborate as far as the technical challenges? It was just kind of circumstantial.
I would say stemming into Streamline, kind of the same mythology of Streamline being a solo mold versus MVP and Axiom being gyro oriented. We just wanted a separate brand for solo molds in general. So at the end of the day, MVP's got its consistent sleek look. Axiom's got its variety of overmold colors, wild appearance and style, and Streamline is focused on high quality solo molds. So they all have their own brand identity.
What made you guys decide to stay in rural Michigan? I mean, for the most part, it was just kind of our hometown area. It's kind of where the company was founded. It's where we've built our staff, our incredible staff. That's all from this local community, and so it's overall, we like it here, and we don't plan to move in the foreseeable future. So just kind of most of the circumstances of this has been our hometown. Will particle glow become a stock plastic option or only for special discs? At least for the foreseeable future, we're still kind of just experimenting with it with limited releases, mostly looking for your feedback about what you think of it. There is no immediate plan to make it a stock offering. I feel like just the regular Eclipse plastic serves all the glow needs for day to day. But we're always experimenting with different things, new technology. So the particle glow between particle proton, particle eclipse is just mostly experimental. So I guess if you have any thoughts or opinions, I guess let us know, and we'll if there's overwhelming support for it, we could consider making it a stock option, but at least it's not in the immediate plans to do so. Well, Brad and Chad participate in one of the MVP practice round with players like Simon, Eagle, and Silva. We'd like to see the bosses play. I got a lot of brushing up I got to do. Having started a family, I've got 3 young children, so I haven't been able to get out as much as I would like. I'd look forward to the kids getting a little bigger so that I can get out and start playing a little bit more. Maybe when I brush up my skills, I can take up to the challenge, but probably not anytime in the immediate future.
I can confidently assume that it's far more entertaining to watch Simon throw a disc than it is me throwing a disc, but I don't know. Maybe one day we can give it a shot, but
I don't know. If you
keep your expectations low.
If you like me throwing into trees, I mean that's probably most what you're going to see. What is your white whale in terms of a disc mold and plastic combination that you keep trying to perfect but isn't quite right? Well, I would say fission plastic, and the thing is, I guess full disclosure, fission plastic is by far my favorite plastic. But that's probably the one that's undergone the most iterative changes. In the early days of fission, it was very gummy and grippy. I really missed that type of fission, but at the same time, that fission was wildly inconsistent. We had board flat, giant spaceship dome. It was really hard to control the consistency with that early days of fission. The next iteration of fission was kind of targeted towards that consistency path, but it kind of compromised the grip. Some of those runs of fission was just maybe a little bit too slick. That one wasn't around very long, handful of years ago, and then we kind of improved the grip of fission, got a nice grippy fission, but that state of fission kind of compromised the weight reduction potential of fission. And so we've been kind of working to improve the weight reduction potential, but at the same time, as we increase the amount of weight redistribution with that, then you get the risk of it's a little bit more of a domier plastic and it doesn't fly like the neutron counterpart. So overall, fission's undergone these iterations. I really love fission. It's my favorite plastic by far, but it's undergone a lot of this evolution. If we can find the right recipe that's that gummy grippy early days of fission, and it molds up really consistently, and it molds up quite similar to the neutron plastic, that will be the ultimate plastic recipe of all time. And we're getting close. We're just making these incremental changes to get there. So I would say fission is probably one of my favorite plastics, especially for that reason. What, in your opinion, are some of the best bang for your buck ways to grow the sport? What are the things that have the most impact, both for MVP and other manufacturers and for individuals? I mean, for manufacturers, I feel like the best thing we can do is support brick and mortar retailers. Do what's right for the retailers so that they can thrive, because the physical presence of disc golf is very important for keeping that community together. I would highly emphasize deprioritize the consumer direct sales on manufacturer sites. And I recognize that we do have MVP Pro Shop, but that's for very limited use cases. It's for things like event, fundraiser discs, or kind of certain player fundraiser discs. But like in general, our main core product releases are always focused around the retailer and the brick and mortar program. So I think as us as a manufacturer, that's a big one. Also, school and youth programs. We've been donating to a lot of schools, and we look forward to doing a lot more in the future. I think that's another important thing for the long-term success and growth of disc golf. As far as individuals, I mean, invite new people to play disc golf. Your coworkers, family, friends, anyone who's never played disc golf before, invite them out. More than likely, that's how you got into the sport. So try to, carry along the torch and, try to get someone else into disc golf is what we recommend to individuals. Another one is just a call to action to talk to your local school about implementing a disc golf program. Refer them to us, because we donate to a lot of schools. So we'll be glad to donate merchandise to the school. So refer them to us. We would love to get disc golf in schools. So as far as individuals, that's our recommendation. Invite new people, as well as talk to the schools or any youth program, really, whatever it takes to grow disc golf. Any products in development for those in small quarters or apartments, for example, to have fun or improve their game in the winter. I would say the Event Horizon Net is a perfect fit for that need. We talked about it in the video segment. It's the silent way to practice your putting, and that's kind of a niche need. And we've received very positive feedback about the Event Horizon Net. So that would be our recommendation for that type of situation. What was your favorite experiment that succeeded or failed? Chad, anything in particular?
I've got a good one there. What's your favorite experiment that succeeded or failed? One of the things with Axiom was making a lot of the vibrant colors in the overmold, and for the longest time I really had doubts on how swirly I can make those overmolds, just understanding the process at the time. But I did have an idea, and we implemented an experiment, and it succeeded far beyond the results I could have imagined, to be honest. Our swirly overmolds are, they still blow me away sometimes. So I would say, swirly overmolds and Axiom was definitely, a good achievement.
Yeah, I agree. What made you want to start your own disc golf company? I mean, early on, I was just a senior in high school. Chad was just starting college. It was just kind of a hobby. It wasn't like meant that we were going to grow into this company, what it is today. We were just disc golfers. We loved disc golf. We worked at our father's company. Just kind of had some ideas there. I mean, Chad, you can kind of elaborate a little about the history about kind of the idea of the overmold.
Yeah, at the time, during our summers, we were playing a lot of disc golf with our friends and family, just as a fun hobby, like all of us. And one day I had a rubber band on my wrist. I just stretched it around my disc and just kind of made a unique, grippy rubber outer edge. And it was kind of cool because we were thinking maybe that would help grab the chains. That just sparked an idea of like, man, we should try manufacturing that, because we had background, working at our father's company during the summer. So that's kind of where the idea started. And then we, pulled out some old inserts out of our barn, refurbished them, made the first run ion, and kind of grassroots growth from there.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, is one of the jobs that you did was you ran the machine that made the little interior car door handle, had like a stiff inside core with like a soft grippy rim. That's kind of sparked the idea of, well, you can do this on a disc golf disc, a stiffer core and an outside, softer grippy overmold to kind of grip the chains. But that technology kind of evolved into the gyro technology as we kind of recognized that was kind of the greater potential.
So I guess another way to put it, what made you want to start your own disc golf company? It really wasn't that we had a big business plan in the beginning. It was just because we loved disc golf. We had an idea. We took a chance on making some prototypes, and the support from all of our fans and retailers supporting our little organic growth has just been the root of our story.
Yeah, it wasn't intended for it to grow. It was just a hobby, really. Fairly new to disc golf, just found out about the GYROpalooza last year. What is the history behind it and getting it started? Actually, I'd like to give a shout out to TK Disc Golf. They did a really good job explaining the history, because they were one of the original fans in that original fan meetup. A local disc golf course called Mill Creek Disc Golf Course. They kind of had someone organized an event to say, hey, MVP fans in the area, because there was some local fans there, and they kind of had a fan meetup, and caught mine and Chad's attention. It was like, because we were so early in our company's history, it was kind of neat to see like this fan gathering. We're like, we want to join this because it sounded like fun, and played at Mill Creek Disc Golf Course. Big credit to Donnie, who put on the event on his own property there. Really beautiful course to play. That was kind of the first event. Only had like 17 or 18 people. It was really small. And at the end of the event, we're just like, hey, who wants to check out the headquarters? And it was like a 45-minute drive down the road. So everybody raced over here for the evening, just had lots of fun playing cornhole, raised a disc golf basket up on a forklift, just did lots of crazy stuff. And so we kind of did that each year, kind of got a little bigger each year. And then, eventually it was, after a few years, was reaching that 300 to 400 participants around like 2018, 2019. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and that's kind of why it just kind of, we paused the in-person experience and then kind of had the virtual experience. But as this was the first year bringing back the in-person experience, and it was an absolute blast, and we look forward to doing it every year moving forward. All right, well, that wraps up the questions and answers segment of GYROpalooza. Again, several hundred submissions. We tried to answer as many as we can. It is a lot of questions. We apologize if we didn't get to your question, but we answered as much as we can, and we hope you enjoyed. And if you still have questions, feel free to reach out, or save your questions for next year. We look forward to reading your feedback and answering your questions every year. So thank you again.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. You guys really put a lot of thought and energy into some really cool questions this year. So thanks for taking the time to write to us, and hopefully we answered some of them, and we look forward to next year.
Yep. Thank you again. See you guys again next year.
See you.
Bye.